Well, I write historical fiction also from a variety of times, and I speak to a lot of historical groups. And one of my favorite groups to speak to, and I've spoken to many, many of them, are the DAR. Half of them are very proper, and the other half are wild women. And they're all in the same room, and so I just figure they're all wild women. And I think most of them are under there. But one of the points I like to make is that these days, they say that a lot of young people are suffering from autoimmune problems, allergies, asthma. That's very much on the rise. And medical research has shown that part of the reason may be that kids are, because of the way our society is these days, they're kept clean. You know, they don't get dirty. I used to come in looking like Pigpen every night. And I had all kinds of impetigo, ringworm, hookworm, you name it. And now you can't kill me with a hatchet. But I'm not saying we should go out and get our kids dirty, but I'm saying that this could be part of the problem, that it's an autoimmune response. And in the same way, if you look at it, if we pick and choose only from our history what is acceptable to everybody and what's inspiring and what's virtuous, I think that's a threat to our intellectual immune systems. I think and when that happens, we do become vulnerable to people who would use our history for their own ends, to make a point. Do you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of what you find in some of today's historians' work has a political agenda behind it. And I think this is too bad. We should accept it at face value for what it is, what it was, and not try to warp it to fit our own preconceived notions of how it should have been, and to use it for partisan political purposes.
Well, I thought I was going to get attacked one time. I was at a book club, and I mentioned my last book was about the Revolutionary War, and I just happened to say, well, George Washington was a really good liar. And a woman said, he was not. I said, no, he understood the importance of misinformation and disinformation in intelligence when you're getting disinformation to the enemy, and he wrote falsified troop reports. He did it himself, but I got in trouble. That was an icon I wasn't to mess with, although I admire him tremendously.
There's a great story about Will Rogers. Of course, everybody loved Will Rogers, and in his time he could do no wrong and almost say no wrong, but one time, as you probably know, he was part Cherokee. At one time, he went down to San Antonio to make a talk to the Old Trail Drivers Association and to their auxiliary, which, you know, was the wives of the trail drivers. And he made this comment that as you fellas came up through our part of the country, you took a lot of our cattle with you to Kansas. Well, one of the ladies jumped on him real hard about that, but, you know, he was just telling the truth, because a lot of these trail drivers, you know, we look at them today, you know, in a different light, but a lot of these trail drivers, the cattle herds increased as they went along because they picked up strays as they could, and going through Indian lands, if the Indians had any cattle that gotten away, they probably wound up in Dodge City.
Well, I have a whole list of questions that I put together that my book Shadow Patriots, this one on the Revolution, answered, and one of them was, what was Molly Pitcher's other nickname? Does anybody know? Dirty Kate. Stuff you can't make up. Apparently, after the Battle of Monmouth, Molly took to the bottle. Her real name was Mary Ludwig Hayes, and she was a genuine heroine. Well, although some historians dispute that now, but she did. Washington's aides called her Dirty Kate. So this is why I love this. This is why I love what Elmer and I do, is the research and finding things about our past that get left out of the history books. I've put together a whole glossary of the vulgar terms from the 17th century for Mary's land, because in writing about the English ancestors, which I had always thought were boring, my people, you know, Episcopalians, I realized I had all these note cards full of terms for body parts and bodily functions that were really creative. So So I made a glossary that I give out as an addendum to the book.
I had an aunt one time who refused to use the word bull. She always referred to it as a he cow. You know?
We won't go into the 3-inch fool. Well, how did you feel when, speaking of good old boys, how did you feel, when they said they were going to make that into a movie? You're familiar with, Tommy Lee Jones, or how did that happen?
I never had met Tommy Lee Jones until he was preparing to film the picture. I didn't know. I was one of the last to find out they were going to do it. Even my agent hadn't told me. I knew that I'd had an option from a production company I'd never heard of. But then an item came out in the Dallas Morning News that they were going to film the good old boys, and then it came out in the Texas Monthly. Nobody had ever told me. I didn't know for sure until Tommy Lee came to San Angelo, where I lived, to scout for possible locations. But Tommy Lee wrote his own script out of my book while he was filming a movie about Ty Cobb at night when he wasn't working. He was doing a script for the good old boys, which TNT had contacted him about doing it, and he had agreed to do it if he could direct it. He had always wanted to direct one. I had very little to do with the picture itself other than having written the book. Tommy Lee Jones is very self-sufficient. He doesn't need a lot of outside advice. But
He's from
and
Texas,
I didn't
right?
presume to offer any. But the art director asked me if I had pictures of any old box and strip ranch houses, as I described in the book, and I sent him several, including a picture of the house I was born in. And he used that as a model for the Callaway Homestead set when they built the set. And I just regretted my mother had passed away a couple of years earlier, and I regretted she had not lived long enough to see that movie or even maybe get to take her out to see the set, because it would have been a replica of the house where she and my father first set up housekeeping after they married. But he did a beautiful job on the picture, considering a very limited budget for television, and I was real pleased with it. It's kind of strange the first time you see one, though, out of your own work. After that, it becomes natural. I did not see my character when I wrote the book is looking like Tommy Lee Jones, but he does now. And it's quite an experience. I wouldn't mind going through it again. But nobody's been ringing my bell for a while.
Well, you had already mentioned something about the students in school asking you why they should study history. And what do you think makes novels set in the West, especially on the frontier and earlier? Because the frontier, actually, we think of the frontier, it was a rather short, like a 20-year span of time, but it goes way back.
That depends on what you consider the frontier.
Right.
I'm sure to the Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth Rock, the frontier started 100 yards to the west.
Right, that's true.
And it moved all the way west until it reached the Pacific.
Yeah.
So it depends on what time you're talking about,
Exactly.
where the frontier was at any given point.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess, first of all, there's that adventure aspect that I think has an appeal, particularly to children, to young people. They're not reading Westerns as much as they used to. Nowadays they read more science fiction. I had a screenwriter tell me one time that she thought Star Wars was one of the greatest Westerns she ever saw.
Absolutely.
And, a lot of that really is a Western in a different mode, but it's still the same basic story.
Well, especially if you analyze the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
It's very Western.
Right.
Very much so. Yeah.
But, I feel that the Western has, from compared to where it was 50 years ago, it's declined somewhat in popularity. It's a more narrow market for Western writers today than it has been before. But I keep feeling that the Western will always be with us. It may change in form. The Westerns today are different from the Westerns 50 years ago. There's a lot of excellent writing in Westerns today that don't get the recognition that other genres get, but to me, if it's a good Western novel, it's a good novel, period. It doesn't have to be considered in terms of genre, though it usually is. And I think a lot of really fine Western writing goes unnoticed. We have some Western writers who are as great at, as fine as what they do as any writers in any genre. They just don't get the recognition for it that they really should, and to me this is a shame. Well, I've been real proud of my current publisher, Forge Books, for their continued support of the Western genre, and I notice you're with Forge also.
I am.
I've been with them for about nearly 15 years now. I haven't before that been with Doubleday and Bantam Books, but they still support the Western and try to publish the best Western material they can get. And if we keep trying to produce the best we can do, I think we'll continue to have an audience. The genre is going to survive.
Well, I remember when I got the Golden Spur in 1983, Jeannie Williams, who'd written a number of books and had been a Spur winner also, but she took my book and was on, I think, the Today Show just to show that a woman had won the Golden Spur. That was like a big deal. I didn't get to go on the Today Show, but my book was. But Jeannie, that was okay because, first of all, they weren't buying me, they were buying the book. And Jeannie Williams certainly has tremendous credentials. But the perception is that women not only aren't featured in books, but they don't write books about the West. And one of the things that I like about Elmer's work and people like Elmore Leonard, and Hombre, was it Hombre?
Elmore Leonard.
Who wrote the one about, with the Paul Newman starred in as the child race with the Apaches.
Right.
And Elmer makes this point in articles and talks that he's given that this has always been alive in Western literature, this diversity of cultures and recognition of other lifestyles and other ways of thinking. And I think that that's only becoming more so with Broken Trail and features like that are being made, Chinese women and what their situation was, because the West was very diverse. And I think now that writers are picking up on that, and people now have described me as a woman's writer, and I'm like, when did that happen? I just like to write about people who surprise you. And, you know, Andrew Jackson was really great at the Battle of New Orleans, but that was his job. And I like to write about people who did the unexpected and surprising, and a lot of those happen to be women, because when they jumped the fence, they really jumped a high fence.